Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is day 15. Now, as you know, that L2 construction series has been running for more than 2 weeks now. And initially, we thought that, during the MCO, we wanted to do something progressive. And we wanted to also use a platform to share knowledge with our audience, whoever has nothing to do, perhaps we provide some seminars so that you can actually listen to us and also to others, and it's a way to connect with the people in the same industry as well. Now, hopefully, this would actually keep us as the host sane and keep us busy as well during this time, as well as with the audience, so that the mind are still active despite us staying at home at this period of time. Very challenging times ahead, and we have to be mentally and physically prepared to deal with the consequences and the impact arising from COVID-19 and the MCO, not only in Malaysia, but around the world. Now, a lot of people have actually said that this pandemic will actually cause more harm than that compared to the 1997 financial crisis. But at the end of the day, I think it depends on which industries that you are in. Some industries are actually thriving during this time. Most of us are actually going to endure the pain arising from the COVID-19. Now, in the 1997 crisis, there were some differences, I think. Like, for example, even if Malaysian market was, or the Asian markets were very badly affected, Chinese market at that point in time was booming. America was doing well. Europe was also fine, so that you can actually make business exports to those countries which are still very much with high demand. But now, every country is going for a lockdown. You can't even get goods from UK, Japan, even China and America. It's not about dealing with other parts of the world. Every part of the world is doing very badly now. Their effort is actually to contain the consequences or the impact and try to protect their own people in their respective countries. So it would actually pose an even more challenging times ahead for us and also everybody else in the world. And this is really a worldwide thing and not limited to a particular region, like the Asian financial crisis or even the property bubble, that happened, or the happened in 2008 and 2009. Even SARS in 2012, it's only limited to a particular region. But now it's really a pandemic that affects the entire world. So, well, we have promised that we will answer your questions in the past 14 days that we have conducted our sessions. Usually we won't have the time to answer most of the questions, and we have decided because of the feedback that we have got from our audience to hold a question and answer only session. Now, what we are going to do now is that we have actually gone through the past 14 days sessions, the questions posed by the audience on the chat group, and those directed to me or to Hong Kit personally. And we have selected those questions which we think are useful to share with the audience. Now, I will begin with a few questions, then I will pass the mic to Hong Kit, who will deal with other parts of the questions and so on. Now, if we still have time at the end of the session, we will still take questions from the floor raised today. Meaning to say that if you still have any questions that you would like us to give our view, you can post it at the chat room now. And at the end, if we still have time, we'll go through those questions and we will be able to answer those questions at the end of the day. Now, so then let me begin. Now, these are questions which posed from day one onwards, right? There is no particular order. We just pick it up and then we'll try to answer most of these questions raised. Now, the first question is this: if it's about the suspension during the COVID-19 or MCO period. And the contract used is actually PEM form. Now, what happened is that the audience asked this question. If the suspension continues for so long that the contract can be determined under clause 26 of the PEM form. Now, the thing is that if you know, in clause 21.4, there is a provision which says that the architect can issue an instruction to suspend works, right? And if the suspension goes beyond the period as stated in the appendix, normally it's 3 months or 4 months, depending on the agreement of the parties. If it has gone beyond that period, then it gives an option to the contractor to determine the contract under clause 26. Now, of course, this is a very special scenario whereby no fault lies on the part of either party. Now, but contractual being contractual, I can foresee that some contractor would utilize this provision to try to get out of the contract to cut loss. Now, this has not been tested, and whether a no-fault position would have a different consequence. But my view is that contract being contract, if it has allowed a specific period, a suspension not to go beyond a specific period, and that is the risk that is allocated by the parties. And if indeed, for whatever reason, the suspension instruction from the architect has gone beyond the period as agreed in the contract, then clause 26 would be activated. The contract may be able to exercise the right under clause 26 to determine the contract and get out of the contract. Now, that is the first question. I hope this is my view. As I said, that it has not been tested in court, and there's something for you to consider. Now, the other question is also arising from PEM form contract. The question is this: can we automatically assume that under the force majeure clause, only EOT is claimable but not loss and expense? Now, if you go for application for extension of time, of course, as I said that we have already warned you, even though MCO has been issued, it's known in Malaysia by all. Don't take a relaxed attitude, right? Don't take a lax attitude and just say that I don't have to apply for an extension of time. Likewise, architect also cannot take a lax attitude to say that I don't have to issue a certificate of extension of time because it's all well known already. Yeah, automatic, you can get an extension of time. That is not the way to deal with things. You know, you still have to follow the contract. Now, the contract says that you have to comply with the procedure for applying for extension of time. Please comply with that procedure. File in a proper notice of intention to claim for extension of time. File in the particulars for how long extension of time that you're going to apply for. Now, force majeure has been defined in PEM form to include governmental order and also include epidemics, right? So the thing is that MCO, I would consider it as a governmental order. So if that is the case, then it will fall under force majeure, and you can actually apply for an extension of time. But the thing is that in PEM form, it specifically excludes the right to claim for loss and expense under clause 24 if the extension of time is granted on ground of force majeure. Because force majeure is a neutral event, and therefore you cannot claim for loss and expense under the PEM form. So that's why you have to look for other grounds that might perhaps give you an avenue. You just need to be very creative. Like, for example, does it fall within a ground that there is a change in the law or the authority's order? If that is a provision, you try to fit into that category, but of course, it is very tough because there's no change in law. Government only exercise their power under existing law, you know, so then that's why it might not fall within that ground also. The other ground that you might consider is that if there is an suspension order issued by the architect, that might give you a ground for loss and expense, right? So then that would also depends on which particular ground that you rely on, and if, whether it would have an additional right to claim for loss and expense. Now, if it is a governmental order, if you fall under that category, then you will have a difficulty because architect may come back to you in clause 24. It says that you cannot claim for loss and expense if it has got nothing to do with the fault of the employer or the consultants. So that's why even if you have an MCO order which entitles you to claim for an extension of time, that might also exclude you from the claim for loss and expense. So to answer specifically your question, if you fall under force majeure, then under PAM form, you are not entitled to loss and expense. But if you try to fit it into other categories depending on the factual circumstances of the case, then you might have a slight chance to claim for loss and expense. But never give up. It's always the case that we advise contractors just to, at this point in time, try to pursue everything and sort it out during the final account stage so that it will give you a better leveraging position as of now, not to give up any of the contractual rights that you have at the moment. Now, that is the usual advice, yeah, for the contractors. Now, the other question, can the speaker also confirm under generic PAM form contract, this MCO is defined under the force majeure clause? I've already said that my view, as I said, that force majeure clause as defined in PAM form, the MCO could include within the definition of the governmental order. So MCO is an order issued by the NSC, which is part of the government, and therefore it should be fallen under the force majeure definition. Now, then I move on to another question. If the site quarantine is due to contractor getting the positive COVID-19, can the contractor apply for EOT? Now, what I think the audience means is this: assuming that you resume work now, you get an extension of time, an exemption from MITI. Let's say you get an exemption order from MITI, or even after the MCO is lifted, right? Then you resume work. And upon the resumption, you find that one of the workers got contracted with COVID-19. As the usual standard operating procedure, the government will step in and say that, okay, you can't do any work for now. I want to quarantine all the workers because they are in close contact with the worker who has been contracted with COVID-19. Now, if that situation happens, of course, the works will get delayed because the workers get quarantined, right? So then in such a situation, whether the contractor would be able to apply for an extension of time. Now, the thing is that that would actually depend on the terms of the contract. But what from my experience is that most of the contracts that actually put the risk of health issues on site and the precaution steps to be taken on the contractors, which makes sense because you are in control of the site, right? You are in control of your own workers. So if your worker actually get contracted with COVID-19, and by extension, all your workers on the site also get quarantined and therefore you cannot continue with the works. Because if you have that kind of allocation of risk that the health issues or related issues on site the risk is actually put on the contractor, then unfortunately the contractor would not be able to apply for an extension of time in that kind of situation because of the contractual allocation of the risk. All right. So the other question is this: under PAM 2006, clause 23.8a force majeure and article 7AD definition, can we consider the current COVID situation is under the term epidemics, and which is enable the contractor to claim for extension of time? Now, I have already answered earlier, even if the COVID-19 is not fallen under epidemics, right, then the MCO would fall under the definition of governmental order as defined in force majeure. So then you can actually use the MCO as a reason for applying for extension of time. Now, COVID-19, the thing is this. What is the actual impact? Now, the thing is that COVID-19 is not only an epidemic, it is a pandemic. Now, these two terms are always confused by the commoners. Now, epidemics, we're talking about the infectious disease within a particular region or a particular site. It is of a smaller region. Pandemic, we're talking about across the country or cross or global, like now. It cross-border, you know, it affects very wide areas and in terms of continents. So pandemic is more serious than a situation than epidemics. But you know, from a legal perspective, if you have actually covered a lesser effect than a pandemic, and if pandemic has occurred, that also affects, you know, a broader region, I do not see why the court will not consider the COVID-19 as part of epidemics, because epidemics is a subset of pandemic, right? So assuming that the contract says it's pandemic, then if the disease affected is only of a smaller region, then it might be excluded. So that's why it actually depends on the term used. Then because I feel that epidemics is a subset of pandemic in that sense, I don't see any good reason that the court would actually interpret it in a way that it does not fall within the definition of force majeure. So my answer, my view is that it should be included, all right? Now, the other thing is this: what if the contractor submits progress claim during MCO period? Claim submitted after 18 March, meaning to say that you have a claim for works done pre-MCO, and then you have not submitted your payment application, right? So then you want to submit the payment application now. So whether the time would still be running as usual under the contract, I would think is very difficult, because you see, the thing is that firstly, how are you going to serve the payment application? Is it by email? Is it whether that would be an accepted mode of service as stipulated under the contract? Even if yes, who is going to do the valuation for you now? Correct, right? It's not like the QS can actually go to the site unless you know, they were allowed to do so. So then they will actually use this as a reason to say that the contract, not only the works has been suspended, the contractual mechanism for the carrying out of their obligation is also suspended in that sense. So you can actually submit your payment application. There's no harm. The thing is that you have to rely on a lot of flexibility after the MCO is lifted to do the proper things, right? If you want to really calculate as to when they should actually certify the payment application that you submitted, then I would think that a good common sense dictate that the MCO period should be excluded because they were prevented from carrying out their proper usual duty because of the MCO. Now, that could actually afford a good reason for the consultants for being not able to value and certify your payment application within the MCO period. Now, I think I have dealt with a number of questions already. I would like to pass the mic to Hong Kit to deal with other questions. Hong Kit, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Wai Loon. So as Wai Loon said, today we will honor our promise to answer your questions. I will try to read according to the questions posted so that you know it is your question. Also, in order for me to cover as many questions as possible, I will go straight to the point in each answer. So, okay, this question is this: just wondering what will be the situation if it is a subcontract without standard forms, EOT, and loss and expense clauses. So my answer is this: the parties' rights and obligations are governed by the subcontract. If the subcontract is without standard forms, the terms and conditions of the standard form would not be applicable. So if the subcontract does not have EOT and loss and expense clauses, the default position is that the contractor would not be entitled to EOT and loss and expense. Second question, tender document stated based on PAM contract 2006 However, the PAM contract is not physically inserted into the contract document, and the contract document is signed off by contracting parties. In this case, the PAM conditions still form part of the contract. I actually need more information to answer this question. However, generally speaking, if the letter of acceptance or the letter of what states that PAM contract 206 is incorporated, then the terms and conditions of PAM contract may form part of the contract. Then, is it valid to claim EOT for demobilization and remobilization time required before and after the MCO? For this question, I say it all depends on what the contract says. The general position is that if the contract allows, then you can. If not, you cannot. Next, will the contractor entitled to profit and attendance for the loss and expenses claim? My answer is this. Again, it also depends on what the contract says. As I have repeated many times, a contractual entitlement to claim is based on the contract. So the starting point of a claim or any claim is that if the contract does not say the contractor is entitled to the claim, then the contractor is not entitled to it. Next question. During MCO period, when do we need to submit our notice for EOT based on PAM 206? Is it after MCO ended? So you see, pursuant to this clause 23.1a of PAM contract 206, the first notice is to be submitted from the date of commencement of the relevant event, MCO in this situation. And clause 23.1b, the second notice is to be submitted within 22 days of the end of the cause of delay. So answer to this question is the first notice, we should submit it within 28 days. And the second notice is 28 days after the end of the cause of delay. Next question. Dear organizer, COVID-19 and MCO can claim EOT under which clause if referred to PWD? There are no direct clauses to claim for EOT under PWD 203A. There is, however, a force majeure ground under clause 43.1A, but the definition of force majeure under clause 58 does not seem to cover COVID-19 and MCO. Next, for the loss and expenses claim on the project staff cost incurred, if a project manager only incur 50% involvement in a project, then what supporting documents are required for contractors to submit in order to justify the 50% involvement in the project? I would say there's no fixed rule for this. However, it is suggested that the project manager's remaining 50% involvement in other projects or duties can be declared, so to justify the claim of 50% involvement. Next, it's a long question. PAM contract clause 24.1a, contractor is to serve a notice to the contract administrator together with an initial estimate of his L&E claim within 28 days from the start of occurrence of relevant event. In clause 24.1b, the contractor is to send the complete particulars of his L&E claim to substantiate his claim within 28 days after the event is ended. Thus, the amount submitted with the complete particulars has to be tally with the amount stated in the initial estimate. So basically, this question is asking whether the two sums have to be in tally. And the second part of the question is, what is the purpose of the initial estimate? Then there's a third point in this question. Is it okay if the contractor just submit his claim only one time? Okay, my answer is this. No, they don't have to be in tally, as the first clause 24.1a only requires an initial estimate of the claim. The purpose of the initial estimate is to keep everyone informed of the estimation of the claim to ensure no one is taken by surprise by the amount of the claim. I also take note that the initial estimate in clause 24.1a is required to be supported with all necessary calculation. It is not a sum that can just plug from the air. So my answer to the final part of this question is that it's not okay for the contractor to submit only one claim, because as also we have mentioned many times, procedural requirement must be followed strictly. Okay, next, may I know is the contractor entitled to get EOT for further 14 days in case the contractors have undergone all precautions, but unluckily there is still a case of COVID-19 happened inside? Okay, I think this question has been dealt by Wailun earlier, but again, I would say whether the contractor is entitled to claim or not, it depends on what the contract says. Because this question does not specific what contracts we are referring to. Next, what happened if the payment due falls during MCO? Is it considered a delay in payment? I would say contractually, yes, it is a delay. However, we must have regard to business common sense, as payment may not be able to make now due to the MCO. So to be prudent and reasonable in this difficult time, I think communication should take place to decide whether the payment is in delay or not. Next, can developer use this pandemic as issue to not proceed payment to contractor? Short answer, no. Pandemic or not, developers' obligation to pay remains. Next is the first letter intention to claim EOT. Is it only to write in initial estimate days to claim? Example, we write in 35 days attaching a memo from architect instructing us to stop work due to MCO. What if the second letter, the actual delays work out is only 20 days? Is it okay? So the first letter initial estimate is 35 days. The actual claim is 20 days. I assume this is in PAM contract 206 context. The answer is yes. Under clause 23.1a, the initial estimate is just an estimation. But as I said earlier, the estimation cannot be made without basis. Next, the main contractor already do their utmost best on prevention of COVID-19 after MCO is lifted. What if those workers inside still get COVID-19 and the site been instructed to close up to 2 weeks? May I know who are going to bear the consequences like EOT and loss and expense? Can the main contractor claim for EOT and loss and expense? We get this sort of questions very often. Again, there's really no straightforward answer to this, as Wailun has explained to us many times over the day. As I repeat, the contractual entitlement of contractor to claim really depends on what the contract says. Next, during SIPA, the construction on site. I think this question means that whether the construction on site should be suspended or not during the SIPA proceeding. So my answer is this: SIPA does not affect the ongoing work. The work must continue during the SIPA proceedings. Next question is government project is subject to SIPA, or there is only project like involvement of national security is excluded? Government project is subject to SIPA claim, except for those government construction contracts exempted under first schedule of exemption order 2014. The first schedule can be found on page 57 of the SIPA booklet. You can get that online. My last question is, can explain once more on zero rise of payment claim? The set-off or counterclaim raised by the respondent in SIPA proceeding can only zero rise the payment claim. So for example, the amount claimed for work done under the payment claim is 100,000. The LADs raised by the respondent is 1 million. So even if the respondent's LAD set-off succeeds, the claimant's claim would only be zero rise, and the respondent would not be given a positive award of 900,000 in the adjudication decision. Right. I think I've covered all the questions. I will pass the mic back to Loon.
Thank you, Hongit. Well, I have additional questions to answer as well. Well, let's get back to the claims. What kind of claims that you can actually make arising from COVID-19 or MCO? Now, you all understand that after the MCO, even after the MCO is lifted, right, there will be a new normal for all of us. Right? Even perhaps you go to a restaurant, you have to keep everyone away or apart from 1 meter, away from each other. Now, the thing is that how are we going to deal with this new norm? Like, for example, the working time might be reduced. The method of working might be changed. The design might also be changed. And all this could actually give rise to claims that would depend on the contract provisions. Like if you take example, PAM form. Now, if you look at the definition of variation under clause 11, it includes what? It includes there's a change of working hours, there's a change of the working order, right? So there's a change of working space as well. So all this, right, would actually be impacted even after the MCO is lifted. With the standard operating procedure to be issued by the Ministry of Health later. This is what it's a common sense kind of things, right? You cannot work as usual like before because you have to follow certain protocols. Now, if that happens, then if you look at your definition of variation, does it then fall within the definition of variation? Under PAM form, I would suggest that it will. Then in such a situation, then the contractor should actually negotiate with the owner, and if I think that would be the most ideal situation, rather than you make multiple claims during the course of the works. It's always good to resolve the issues once and for all and cover all the issues so that the risk will be allocated at the very beginning. If the parties cannot reach a supplemental agreement to deal with all these impacts and issues, then you follow the contract. Now, under PAM form 2006, this kind of situation would constitute a variation. And then you can actually claim for variation claim. Now, what happens if the architect refuses to issue a variation order? Does it preclude the contractor from claiming for variation claims? Now, I would think not, because like yesterday's topic on consultants' integrity, right? Every consultant is expected to be fair and to work within the contract, right? And not working for the employer. So in such a situation, if the consultant or the contract administrator fail to work as expected under the contract, then the contractor can still insist on the claim and pursue it later, perhaps either in SIPA or in arbitration. Because even in SIPA, even without any variation order, when such variation order should be issued by the architect, but he did not, the adjudicator can still decide on that claims, because there's a power given under Section 25 of SIPA to supplement the opinion of the architect or the contract administrator. So as I said, that when this kind of a scenarios arise, always go back to the contractual provisions, right, to look for an answer, because each contract is different. Now, actually, we would like to answer more questions from the participants. We have also seen a lot of other questions being posed today, and therefore we will not be able to. Unfortunately, we will not be able to answer all of them because of the time has actually gone past our session. And if you think that you have more questions for us, we will then collate those questions for the next session. Do feel free to text us to give us your opinion. And if you want us to answer more questions for you, leave us a message. We will have another special session for Q&A, whereupon we will be able to pick up more interesting questions, and we will be able to share our views with the audience like today. All right. I think that's all for us now. I'm going to pass the mic back to Hong Kit and to close the session.
Thank you, Wai Loon. Yeah, so thank you, everyone. So we have another session later today. We're going to talk about defect at 3 p.m. Feel free to join us. So yeah, it's at 3 p.m. Yeah, so as you can see, we are still lining up all the sessions for the weeks to come. We hopefully to gain more support from you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Hong Kit, and thanks the audience for continuing support for our L2 construction series. Thank you very much. Have a nice day ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Wai Loon. See you.
Bye-bye.